Welcome, Wargamers, to the noble and knightly mortal realms, because today we are talking about some of the various Stormhosts of the Stormcast Eternals. Now, for those of you who are just starting off in this series, this is part 3 of my coverage of the latest Stormcast Eternals battle tome. In part 1, we painted some broad strokes about the faction and kind of the themes that are really important when you discuss them, and in part 2, we talked about how they are organized and specialized into fighting groups that can rise to meet any challenge. But today, we're going to take a little step back and look at the Stormhosts themselves. Now, I want to put a note here, very important. I do plan on doing a dedicated video for each and every one of these Stormhosts in the future, featuring stories for each one of them, talking about characters that are mentioned, that kind of stuff. But this is meant to serve as an overview for newer folks coming into the army to just get a quick sense of how they're divided, some quick points about their temperaments or fighting styles, whatever makes them unique. And one thing I want to add just before we jump in is if you like this video and you're interested in this faction, please consider using the affiliate link in the description down below. Noble Knight Games is a great store here in the US with discounts on all of their Games Workshop products, and that link, using it goes a long way to support me, my wife, and the channel. It's life-changing stuff, and I appreciate everyone who's used it so far. Now, currently, there are 8 playable Stormhosts in the latest battle tome that just came out. There's actually way more Stormhosts than that exists, but we have rules for 8 of them. Keep in mind, this is a wonderful place to design your own Stormhost. Just like you can design your own army for any faction in 40k or Age of Sigmar, this is where your creativity gets to shine. Because not only are there these major 8 Stormhosts, but each one of them has had various splinters or sister Stormhosts, I guess we could call them, as time has gone on, as they've grown and expanded. So you can have your own custom one with its own story, but use the tactics of, one of these 8, since that's where they were in your lore descended from. And while they may be most recognizable by their different colored armor, there's a lot more going on than just what color jersey you are wearing, because each Stormhost, as we discussed in my last video, has their own warrior culture, their own values, their rites, rituals, deeds, and accolades. They have their own figures and heroes that they revere, battle tactics that they bring into the mortal realms, and while I can't capture every detail about them in this one video, like I said, more on the way, I do want to highlight what makes these next 4 unique, and then we'll grab the remaining 4 in my next video. And one thing I want to slip in here just before someone leaves a comment about it, I'm going to try to find artwork for each one of these Stormhosts and bring it up as I talk about them, but understand there's not an equal amount of art for each one of them, so I'll do the best I can, but I will try to note the heraldry and color scheme so that you can kind of do a quick Google search to get a better sense as to what they look like. And so first up in this discussion has to be the Hammers of Sigmar, the poster boys of the poster boys of Stormcast Eternals. These are the gleaming, golden armored Stormcast that generally act as the protagonist of most military actions. And, frankly, were the first Stormhost we were ever introduced to. Way back in the Gates of Azir book that first came out, that really was kind of the short story that first introduced us to the idea of the Realm Gate Wars and the Stormcast coming down from Azir to fight the Khorne Bloodbound. These guys were the first in to the fray. In fact, the Hammers of Sigmar are actually kind of considered Sigmar's vanguard. They often take the leading role in major military actions. This is because they are renowned as sharp tacticians and inspiring heroes. Because there's a lot more going on than just Stormcast. Because Stormcast have to work with mortals and other factions and other, forces of order. So having people that can galvanize a bunch of strangers into one fighting force is incredibly impressive. Among their ranks are epic characters such as Vandus Hammerhand, whose leadership in the Realm Gate Wars saw the forces of order take some major victories. You got like Neve Blacktalon, who's Sigmar's favorite assassin, it seems. Astria Soulbright of the Sacrosanct Chamber. Basically, all of the named heroes that are awesome, with one major exception that we'll talk about later, are in this Stormhost. They have a major emphasis on success, leadership, and bravery on the battlefield. And to be honest with you, they really are meant to be sort of the ideal Stormcast Eternal in every regard. Now, next up are the Hallowed Knights, and I love these guys for the 2 sides of their coin. So on one side of the coin, these are the most religiously devout of Stormcast Eternals. Mortal champions who called upon their faith in Sigmar to fight chaos to the last breath, and were reforged as these true warrior priests of the God King. That's really how they see themselves. That not only are they called to battle, but they're also called to minister to the people of the mortal realms. And as such, they have lots of rituals and rites and incantations and prayers that prepare them to face the horrors of chaos. Their mantra, "Only the faithful," which is so epic in all the Black Library books, by the way, because you'll hear someone say, like, "Who will survive when all others fail? Only the faithful!" And they're often led by one of the best heroes in the game, and in fact, one of the only non-Hammer of Sigmar characters in the entire faction, that is Lord Celestin Gardas Steel Soul, leader of the Steel Souls and my personal Stormcast Heartthrob. Now, there's a lot to praise when it comes to Gardas. He really just needs his own video for sure. But if I could pick one thing to highlight, is that I love his personal mantra, which is "much is demanded of those to whom much has been given," or something along those lines. And I really love it because that to me sums up Hallowed Knights as a whole. Right? Gardas is just one character in a massive Stormhost. I mean, these are some of the major ones that were first introduced to us. There are like tens of thousands of warriors. He's just a dude. But that concept that he carries of much is demanded of whom much has been given. And I love that because it's this faith-based faction that sees their reforging as a divine gift to become the instrument of their God's will. And while those blessings are plentiful, they also have an unbelievably large responsibility that comes with it. To live, to fight, to die, and do it all over again for eternity. And like I said, that's all one side of the coin. You can see them being, religiously fervor and trying to improve the communities around them and basically witness and serve the mortals who are near them. And they are depicted as generally really likable. Honestly, all their books that they have featuring the Hallowed Knights, you really just do like the characters. They're cool guys. But the other side of that coin is that they suffer tremendous effects from multiple reforgings. That inspirational faith can slowly twist into a fanatical and scary level of zeal. And there are few things as scary as one of these demigods that loses control due to their faith manifesting in some way that is destructive. Like there's sort of that trope of the end is nigh guy in a city who, just walks around with nothing but a sandwich board that says the end is nigh, spray painted on it or something. Now just imagine that, but he's a 7-foot tall god of lightning. You know what I mean? Like that gets really scary really fast. And just to note it here, like I said, for regards to the pictures and what you're able to see, you can note the Hallowed Knights by their signature silver armor with blue and gold accent colors. Now, next up are the Celestial Vindicators, and this is a Stormhost that's really defined by the word vengeance. Like, to me, if I had to be honest with you, it's sort of like a whole army of Batmen. If I could, just angry, edgy, and wildly dangerous. They are noted for their brilliant teal army scheme, with the white and gold trim. Looks really awesome on fleek. And their sole mission and focus is the destruction of chaos armies. Now that might seem like, isn't all the Stormcast made for that? These are characters who basically, rather than chanting praise to Sigmar in their last breaths, these heroes reached a place of absolute rage and indignation in their mortal lives and asked Sigmar only for the strength to slaughter as many as they could. Rather than reaching out to Sigmar in a place of faith, like the Hallowed Knights, this was born of anger. And anger can be used. And so that wish was granted, and the Celestial Vindicators are some of the most intense fighters that Sigmar has. Their passion and zeal can reach an absolute fever pitch on the battlefield where the Celestial Vindicators are hacking and slashing crazily, and they're just all offense. It was really emphasized actually in the first battle tome that featured them that their liberators rarely used shields. Like they would just each have a sword and to just go ballistic, just become a blender in combat. And this goes on to the point where they can lose themselves in combat and break formation, which is terrible but it's a reality that all the other Celestial Vindicators understand. It's like they are all stuck in rage mode when it comes to chaos. And when that reaches just the right level, some of them just absolutely lose it, which, for what should be a very structured and ordered and controlled army, makes them an outlier. Like, in my opinion, if you had to pick the most Khorne-like, Khorne being the god of battle and bloodshed, these guys are at least a major contender of Khorne-like Stormhosts. And because of this, the defining feature of their leadership at the top is just their ability to control themselves, which is awesome because there's no other job in the world that promotes you based on your level of chill. Like, I'm just so in with that. I love it. But as you can imagine, more than any other Stormhost, there's a heavy emphasis on aggression, sometimes mindless, but always very effective. And lastly, for the ones that we're going to cover today, are the Anvils of the Heldenhammer. And rather than a temperament or value like faith or vengeance being the defining factor for these Stormcast, what really makes them unique are their origins. The Anvils of the Heldenhammer are, just to kind of give you a sense of what they look like, the black armored Stormcast Eternals have a gold trim, and this is really just meant to match their super dark and dour moods and outlooks. You see, I made this statement in the first video of this series that generally speaking, the souls that Sigmar took were from heroes who were fighting against chaos in the Age of Chaos and just wanted a chance to kill a few more. But that is not the case with the Anvils of the Heldenhammer. The souls that make up this Stormhost were brought up from the various underworlds of Shyish rather than mortals making a triumphant last stand. Essentially, Sigmar himself went down to hell and plucked up a bunch of heroes that existed long before the Age of Chaos. Some were souls as far back as the Old World, and some were more recent, but all of them were potent soul stuff that he could forge into a weapon. And that death has given each and every one of them a truly eternal perspective. Because every one of the Anvils, I'm just going to call them that for short, has tasted death in a way that no other Stormcast has. Like, if you were a hero who's dying in the Age of Chaos and you're like, Sigmar, grant me the strength to just kill a few more guys, you get punked, Sigmar takes you up and turns you into Celestial Vindicator. Your concept of death is very minimal, right? You didn't truly die. Yeah, you were struck down, but Sigmar took you immediately up. That is so different from an Anvils of the Heldenhammer who have, some of them have existed in unlife, this kind of weird Geist state for millennia. So death to them feels and looks very different. Some of them have been drifting sprites, like I said, Geist for centuries, and now they're recast into heroes that need to take up arms again. So they might have truly ancient values or rituals, and they might be from all over the place, because again, they don't have similar temperaments and stuff. That's just about where they came from. So to me, this is one of the most interesting Stormhosts simply because they can have some crazy perspectives on the war that's happening because they just understand time differently. Even more differently than other Stormcasts who may have been around for, a couple hundred years. They were born as a human, and then let's say they've been reforged a few times. It's not hard to imagine a typical Stormcast could be like 200 years old. But when you stand in front of someone who could easily be thousands of years old because of one character in specific we know came from the old world, it's like, that is a real ancient soul with a very, very different perspective on life. And it's like, I want to know that guy's story kind of a thing. So every one of these heroes, I'm like, what is your story? I want to know everything about you. It's so fascinating. Now, of course, as you may imagine, Nagash, the god of undeath, is the most jealous person for these souls in particular because he sees Sigmar coming down and taking them as betrayal here. Sigmar's the ultimate soul thief for coming into my afterlife and pillaging the best and the brightest. And honestly, he's not wrong, but also, without doing that, we wouldn't have one of the most, badass Stormhosts that exists. And if you want some great insight into the characters and how they chat with one another, and honestly, a shout out to that old world character that I mentioned, go ahead and read Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds. It's sort of like the lore book that set the tone for the last major story arc in Age of Sigmar. Now, I want to end this video like I end all of them by asking, why is this so cool? And the truth is, there's just some really neat things about each one of them. The Hammers of Sigmar kind of get a lot of guff for being boring and bland. The truth is, the fact that they have so many characters, I think, is their strength. Like, they're just clearly are a character-driven story. A storm host. And that manifests itself because Vandis Hammerhand is one of the most interesting characters that Games Workshop's written, in my opinion. Neve Blacktalon, she has, I think, 3 books, possibly 4 in her series. I know they did Blacktalon first, Mark, and then they did a prequel and then a sequel. It's kind of all over the place, but fantastic character nonetheless. Even the named characters they have in their book that don't specifically have like a Black Library book attached to them, like Astria Soulbright I mentioned earlier, in like the 5 paragraphs of lore that they get, they're really compelling. So like, I feel that they may have they might be light on what makes them unique in terms of their temperament or values, but they're very heavy on character, and I like that a lot. The Hallowed Knights are my absolute favorite Stormhost. In terms of their lore, I love Gardas. He's a cool dude. Celestial Vindicators. I actually had a Celestial Vindicator army at one point. Tons of fun to paint. Again, like I said, if I had to pick one team that was like, this is the Batman of Stormcast Eternals, that's them, no question. And then the Anvils of the Held Hammer, the idea of just their perspective on time and major events, who have seen empires rise and fall over and over again, and gods come and go, has been really cool to think about. And I just think there's a lot of story potential there for them. And even though they're all unified by things, they can still be very diverse. So for example, the idea of faith can look wildly different from each Hallowed Knight member. Like, one person could perceive faith to be giving back to the mortals and being like a stalwart defender of those weaker than you because that's what the God King would do. And others might be the pursuit of knowledge or like sciences and that kind of stuff. That's where you get more into like the Sacrosanct Chamber stuff. They both have the same temperament and values. They want to honor their deity in some capacity, but the way that they express that faith is very different. And that goes for each and every one of the things that makes these factions unique, is that Anvils of the Heldenhammer, yeah, they're all heroes from across various afterlives of Shyish, but each one of those afterlives is wildly different. Like, it's not a blanket statement that like covers all of them and unifies them. Like, they can be super different characters, even if they've all just been dead for a long time. Like, that's not enough to make you like of one mind. And one thing that gets touched on a lot, and I'm going to bring this up in the next video about Stormhosts as well, is that the attitude that they have trickles down to any forces that they work alongside. So like the Hallowed Knights, the city that their Stormkeep is located in, Hallowheart, is really a faith-driven place. It is a theocracy through and through in the heaviest handed way possible, whereas something more like the Hammers of Sigmar, it's a lot more to do with like civilization and democracy and kind of like the ideal of what a city of Sigmar should be, whereas the places defended by the Anvils of the Heldenhammer tend to be dark and morose and dour and all these things just to match their moods. They just seem to project whatever their values are around them. But friends, those are just my thoughts, and I would absolutely love to hear yours. Which of these 4 is your favorite? And then tell me, what is your favorite overall? I'd love to hear it and read it in the chats down below. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and we'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.